All right, so we're going to talk about chapter 6, a new chapter now. We're going to talk about algebra a little bit. We do a unit of algebra, which is one chapter of algebra, and you know how we've been moving around from topic to topic. So it's our time to do maybe what most people think of when they think of a math class is a little bit of algebra. So we're going to start on section 6.1 and do some basic operations and build some foundation for this algebra chapter. So if you'll have that printed off and be following along with me. 6.1 talks about order of operation. So there's just one right answer, we know, to these math problems, and they're determined by order of operation. Now, you should know that most calculators are programmed with order of operation. Kind of the exception would be just an A over B calculator, maybe an add and subtract. At the Dollar Tree, they'll sell some simple add and subtract calculators. Those may not know order of operation, but pretty much every other calculator does know this order. So if you tell it to do 2 plus 3 times 6, if you type that in most calculators, you can check yours to see, 2 plus 3 times 6, your calculator knows that you have to do the multiplication, get 18, before you do the addition and get 20. Which would be different if you were using, like I said, a over B calculator, which does 2 plus 3 is 5, and then 5 times 6 would be 30. Different answer, not the correct answer. So there's just one way to do it, one order that's considered correct. All right, so let's talk about that order. A lot of people learned the please excuse my dear Aunt Sally method. There's other things too, but this seems to have stood the test of time. So please, P for parentheses, excuse, E for exponents, my, M for multiplication, dear, D for division, Aunt, A for add, and Sally, S for subtract. So PEMDAS. So the P stands for any type of, we talk about it in parentheses because that's the most common, but it's any type of grouping symbol. And so that could be parentheses, brackets, braces, anything that says these are grouped together, any type of grouping symbol. E is exponents, which would also include radicals. If you have a square root or any type of radical in your problem, they're actually related, exponents and radicals. So that's your second thought. M is multiplication, and D is division. So there's actually kind of a mistake in this if you think about it, because multiplication doesn't always come before division. These two are grouped. It's from left to right. For multiplication and division, you do those from left to right. So if multiplication is before division, yes, you do it first. But if you have a divide before multiply, like if we had 14 divided by 7 times 3, we would do the 14 divided by 7 first, even though it looks like it's not in the right order. We would do 14 divided by 7, get 2, and then times 3 is 6. So these two, they're really on the same level. There's just 4 levels. This level, these go together, and then add and subtract will go together. So there's really just 4 orderings. But this kind of helps us remember it a little bit, I guess. So add and subtract will be like that as well. Add and subtract, you go left to right. So they're on the same level of order. So you do your parentheses first, then any exponents, then multiply or divide from left to right, then add and subtract from left to right. So that's our ordering. So you can pause the video now. I have some practice problems, the activities for you to practice before I move on, but I'll be answering those questions. But I always encourage you to try them first before I go into the answer. All right, so we got 5 to the second. A little practice with our exponents again, just to remind you about that from the last chapter. 5 to the second means 5 times 5 or 25. If there is a negative, not in parentheses, and again, your calculator knows a lot of these things, so if you type it in correctly, it will give you the correct answer. The negative, if it's not in parentheses, is a weighting negative. We do 5 squared, which is 25, and then the negative is put on like a negative multiplier at the end. So that goes with order of operations. We do exponents before they multiply. So that's like a little -1 multiplied out front of that. So it weights, it has to do the exponent first, then the -1. And because it's not in a parenthesis, it's not going to that exponent. It's not part of the base. Whereas on number 3, the negative is in a parenthesis, saying we're talking about the negative is squared too. The number -5 is squared, making it a positive 25. A negative times a negative, making it positive. Fix my numberings. Okay, number 4. Now we're going to do some more operations. I'm going to get that kind of out of the way. So in this one, we would do our multiply, then we would multiply, and then last we would save that as a subtract. So 5 times 11, 55. 3 times 4 is 12. Then subtracting those two answers, let's see, is that 43? As we do these, check them on your calculator. It's a good idea to practice using your calculator as well. Lots of parentheses here. So we do the innermost parenthesis first. 2 plus 5 is 7. Then inside that parenthesis, you do that like as a separate problem. Complete the parenthesis. Then it has a times, which would be 21. And then lastly, I would do the add, giving me 23. Once you complete your parenthesis, then you go outside your parenthesis and also follow the order. The only thing left to do is 2 times 23, which is the final answer of 46. All right, number 6. Do inside the parentheses first, there's a multiply, and then subtract, so it'd be 35. 3 times 2 is 6. And then lastly, I would subtract, which gives me 29. Outside the parenthesis, I have a times 2. 2 times 29 for 58. Number 7, 14 divided by 7 times 4. So it's a divide and a multiply. And this, I guess, was to make my point earlier that you don't multiply and then divide like PEMDAS says. These are on the same level, so you do them from left to right, any multiply and divide. So you should do this divide first and get 2, then proceed 2 times 4 is the 8. Number 8. Add and subtract is left to right, so also making that point. Now there's shortcuts to this, and you've probably learned some strategies, but to do it in its purest form, we go left to right. So we would say 6 minus 4 is 2. Then we keep proceeding 2 and 2 is 4, and then 4 minus 1 for a final answer of 3. So add and subtract. You don't add first and then do the subtract. You can do that left to right in the order. So again, PEMDAS is a little bit misleading in that it's not truly that order for the last two categories. Number 9. So in this one, we have no parentheses, so level 2 would be any exponents. 4 squared is 16. Notice that negative is not in a parenthesis, so it weights as a subtraction or a -1 multiplier. After exponents becomes multiplication or division from left to right. We just have one of those, which is 8. And then all that's left is add and subtract, so go left to right. 12 and 8 is 20. 20 minus 16, the final answer is 4. Okay, then number 10, we have a division bar. Now when you have a division bar as kind of a fraction bar, I would think of it as, you want to treat these like two separate problems. Work the numerator, then work the denominator, and then lastly address it as a fraction or a division. So don't really use PEMDAS, that order, and think of this as the division that has to be done. Think of these as two separate problems. So I assess the numerator, doing the parentheses first, getting a 64 and minus 4, which is 60. Then next I would multiply 2 times that answer. 60 is 120. And then 120 plus 8 for a final answer in the numerator of 128. For the denominator, I do this exponent 27, then I do 29 minus 27 for the denominator answer of 2, and then you reduce the fraction. In this case, it reduces perfectly to just an answer of 64. On the next page, we take this up a notch from just regular numbers to working with our variables. So we know in algebra, we assign a variable to an unknown so that we can work a general case instead of these specific value cases. So on the next page, number 11, it tells us in the directions that let x stand for -2, y for 3, and a for 4, and then work these problems. So number 11, x squared. So I want to tell you, when you plug a negative in for a variable, we're assuming a parenthesis. That's, I think, an important detail. I don't know that we've mentioned that. That's come up before. But when you're filling in a value, it says x is -2. That means the number we're plugging in here is negative. So it assumes a parenthesis, that it's the number -2 is being squared, which will result in a positive form. Number 12, x is cubed. So x, we learned, is -2. And again, when we're filling in for a variable, we assume a parenthesis around that value, that it's the actual number -2, not just a -1 multiplier. So negative to an odd power is going to be negative regardless anyway, whether there was a parenthesis or not, because a negative times a negative times a negative, an odd amount of negative stays negative on there. Okay, 13, -x plus y minus 3a. So notice we have a negative, that would be a -1 multiplier on that one. -1, or a negative in front of x, which will be -2. So we wind up with a double negative. Y is 3 and a is 4. So this double negative becomes a +2. And then the first order, I guess we do here, is the 3 times 4, which is 12, and the rest is add and subtract. 2 and 3 is 5, and then 5 minus 12 for a final answer of -7 there. Oh, I didn't mean to erase my values. All right, number 14. I'm going to write that out again. Okay, the values we had, x is -2, y is 3, and a is 4. Plug those in. -3 times -2 plus 2 times y is 3. A is 4, and x is -2. Then evaluate that with your order of operation. That will be +6 when we multiply. I guess I should do parentheses first. Like I said earlier, there's other ways you can get to the same answer, but the purest way, following the order of operation, is the safest. So it doesn't hurt to go ahead and call that +6, but purely I am supposed to start with my parentheses and do a minus minus, a subtract a negative becomes plus. My parentheses is 6. Then the next order would be jump over here and do the multiply, do this multiply, and then lastly add and subtract. So 6 plus 6 is 12, and 12 minus 6 for a final answer there of 6. All right, number 15. 3x minus y times -a. So plugging in for our variables, we know x is -2, y is +3, and then a, we plug in, is 4. Using our order of operation inside this parenthesis, I would multiply first. 3 times -2 is -6. Then I would subtract that 3, which is -9, and -6 minus 3 would make -9. And then over here, I've just got a -4. Nothing really to do in that, but it is a -4. And then lastly, -9 times -4 for a final answer of +36. And again, if I didn't say that already enough, make sure you practice typing these. It's good practice. If you haven't been doing this like all the time, anyway, you need to practice this on your calculator using the right parentheses, finding your subtraction, your negative signs, and getting that off of our calculator as well. That's a skill all of its own. So do it by hand. Certainly, I want you to know how to do it without the calculator, but then also practice using your calculator. You need to be able to do that either way. Okay, then lastly for this little set, filling in our values, y is 3, a is 4. Over here, x is -2, and y is 3. And then using your order of operations to assess that, do our parentheses first. We got 2 parentheses. It doesn't matter. You're just going to do these 2 parentheses separately and then subtract your answer. So over here, I get a -6. You know, when you multiply, different signs are negative. And then 20. Then I will add those answers. -6 plus 20 gives me a 14. Jump over here, do this parenthesis. Multiply is -6. plus 3 is -3, so that's my answer to that parenthesis. Then I still have a subtraction between those two to finish out. The negative negative makes it plus for a final answer of 17.